On August 23rd, in the middle of a normal workday, the Walmart store in Grand Forks turned into the scene of a bloody massacre that shook the entire state of North Dakota. But 3 months earlier, there had been no signs of trouble. Derek Coleman was unloading another pallet of goods in the warehouse when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Hey, Coleman, are you going to be messing around with those boxes all day? I've already unloaded 2 pallets while you're dancing around with your first one." Derek straightened up and turned around. Tyrone Kincaid was standing in the aisle between the racks, leaning his shoulder against a metal rack and smirking. His pearly white teeth sparkled in the dim light of the warehouse. He was wearing a uniform vest over a black t-shirt, with headphones sticking out of his pocket. "I'm doing my job," Derek replied evenly, returning to the boxes, "and I'm in no hurry." "That's exactly the point. You're not in any hurry." Tyrone took a step closer, and the smirk on his face widened. "You know what your problem is, Coleman? You're too slow. Boring. I bet it's the same at home, huh? Slow and boring." "Shut up, Kincaid," Derek interrupted without looking up. His hands tightened on the edge of the box more than necessary. "Mind your own business." "Ouch! Did I hit a nerve?" Tyrone laughed and raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Okay, don't get so worked up. I'm just telling it like it is. Maybe you should speed up a little, or life will pass you by, you know? While you're here fiddling with boxes, others are living their lives." Derek straightened up and looked Tyrone straight in the eye. A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the ventilation and the distant noise of the sales floor. Tyrone continued to smile, but his gaze was defiant. "You got a problem with me?" Derek asked slowly. "No problem, bro," Tyrone shrugged. "Just stating the facts. You're slow. Everyone knows it." Derek took a step forward, his fists clenched involuntarily. Tyrone noticed this and stopped smiling, but he didn't move, standing up straight and straightening his shoulders. "Kincaid! Coleman!" came a sharp shout from the door. Both turned around. Clarence Ogbuafi, the shift manager, stood in the doorway with a tablet in his hands and a displeased expression on his face. "Are you working here or running a market? Kincaid, go to the electronics department. Customers are waiting. Coleman, finish with that pallet and move on to the next one. And quickly." Tyrone smiled one last time, turned around, and slowly walked toward the exit. Passing Derek, he muttered under his breath, "You're lucky. Next time, we'll talk without witnesses." Derek watched him go, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. Clarence gave him an appraising look but said nothing, just shook his head and went to check other areas of the warehouse. Derek went back to work, but his hands were still shaking with anger. Tyrone always knew how to get under people's skin. They had been working in the same store for 2 years, and during that time Derek had come to understand one thing. Kincaid was the kind of person who enjoyed hurting others. He was cocky, mocking, always ready to throw out a snide remark or make an ambiguous joke. The rest of the shift passed without incident. Derek unloaded 3 more pallets, helped stock the shelves in the household chemicals department, and finished work at 6 o'clock sharp. After changing in the locker room, he went out to the parking lot and got into his old Honda Civic. He started the car and turned on the radio, but the music did little to distract him from his thoughts about Tyrone. The guy was getting more and more insolent. The drive home took 20 minutes. Derek lived with his wife in a small 1-story house on the outskirts of Grand Forks. The house was old, but cozy, with a small yard and a garage that had long since been turned into a storage room for old things. They had been renting it for 4 years and were planning to buy something of their own someday, but so far it had not gone beyond talk. Derek parked at the house and went inside. The living room was quiet. He took off his shoes, walked into the kitchen, and saw Chanel sitting at the table. She was propping her head up with her hand and looking out the window. An untouched cup of tea stood in front of her. "Hi, sweetheart." Derek approached and kissed her on the top of her head. "How was your day?" Chanel turned around, and he immediately realized that something bad had happened. Her eyes were red, and there were traces of tears on her cheeks. "Chanel? What's wrong?" He crouched down next to her chair and took his wife's hand. She sniffed and pressed her palm to her lips, trying to hold back her sobs. "I got fired," she whispered. "This morning, they called me in to see the head doctor and told me they were cutting back on staff. They said they were sorry, but they couldn't keep me on. I worked there for 5 years, Derek. 5 years. And they just took it and—" Her voice broke. Derek hugged his wife, pressing her head against his chest. "Hush, hush, everything will be fine." He stroked her back, feeling her shudder with sobs. "It's not your fault. Staff cuts are their problem, not yours. You're an excellent administrator. You'll find another job." "But what are we going to do?" Chanel looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. "You know we're barely making ends meet as it is. How are we going to pay for the house, the car, everything else? Your salary alone isn't enough." Derek hugged her tighter. "Listen to me. We'll manage. I'll take on extra shifts, maybe find a side job. And you'll start looking for a new place. You have experience, education. They'll definitely hire you. The main thing is not to despair, okay?" Chanel nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Okay. I'll try. It's just so sudden. All of this. I didn't even expect it." "I know, honey, I know. But we're in this together and we'll get through it." That evening, they sat in the kitchen for a long time, discussing plans. Derek made dinner, pasta with chicken and vegetables, and they ate, barely speaking. Chanel looked devastated, and Derek understood how she felt. Her job at the clinic meant a lot to her. It was her first serious job after college, and she was proud that she had managed to stay there for so long. The next 2 weeks were a challenge. Every day, Chanel sent her resume to clinics, hospitals, and private medical centers. She responded to job ads for administrators, secretaries, and even call center operators. But the results were disappointing. Out of 20 resumes sent, only 4 responded. 2 interviews ended in nothing. Candidates with more experience were preferred. Another interview led to a job offer, but the salary was so low that it would barely cover her gas expenses. The 4th position required night shifts, and Chanel declined, realizing that she would not be able to handle such a schedule. Derek saw his wife becoming more depressed with each passing day. She stopped taking care of herself, sitting on the couch for hours with her laptop, browsing job sites, or lying in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. He tried to cheer her up, cooked dinner, cleaned the house, but felt that it wasn't enough. At the end of the 2nd week, LaToya, Chanel's younger sister, came to visit. She worked as a nurse at Alta Bates Hospital and always looked composed and energetic. LaToya brought pizza and a bottle of wine, and the 3 of them sat in the living room chatting about nothing in particular. "So, what's up with the job?" LaToya finally asked, setting down her glass. "Chanel, have you found anything?" Chanel shook her head. "Nothing worthwhile. Either they don't hire or they pay peanuts. I don't know what to do anymore." LaToya tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the armrest of her chair. "Have you tried looking in stores? Big chains like Walmart or Target? They always need people for the cash register and stocking shelves. It may not be the most prestigious job, but they pay well and the schedule is usually flexible." "In stores?" Chanel frowned. "I've never worked in retail." "So what?" LaToya shrugged. "It's not complicated. A couple of days of training and that's it. Besides, Derek works at Walmart, right? Maybe he can recommend you. Connections always help." Chanel looked at her husband. Derek nodded. "She's right. We often have openings, especially at the register. If you want, I can talk to Clarence, our manager. He's a reasonable guy. I think he'll at least agree to an interview." Chanel paused, considering the offer. "Do you really think this is a good idea? We'll be working in the same place. Won't we get tired of seeing each other all the time?" Derek smiled. "We won't be in the same section. I'll be in the warehouse. You'll be at the register. We'll rarely cross paths. Besides, it's temporary. As soon as you find something better, you can leave. But right now, we need the money." Chanel took a deep breath. "Okay, let's give it a try. It can't get any worse." The next morning, they drove to Walmart together. Derek's shift started at 9, and he arranged to meet Clarence at 8:30. They parked in the employee parking lot and entered through the side entrance. The store had just opened, and there were still few customers in the sales area. Derek led Chanel to the administrative department, located behind the customer service desk. Clarence Ogbuafi sat at his desk, which was covered with papers and folders. He looked up when Derek knocked on the door. "Coleman, good morning. Is this your wife?" "Yes, sir. This is Chanel. Chanel, this is Clarence Ogbuafi, the shift manager." Chanel held out her hand, and Clarence shook it, nodding. "Have a seat. Derek said you were looking for a job." "Yes, that's right." Chanel sat down in a chair across from the desk. Derek remained standing by the door. "I was recently laid off from the clinic where I worked as an administrator. Now I'm looking for something to keep me busy." Clarence leaned back in his chair, looking at her intently. "Do you have experience working with people? With cash registers? With computers?" "With people, yes, of course. I worked at the reception desk, admitted patients, made appointments, maintained the database. I haven't worked with cash registers, but I'm a quick learner." Clarence nodded. "Okay, I need someone for the cash register. One of our cashiers is on sick leave and we don't know when she'll be back. I can take you on for a trial period. 1 month. If you do well, we'll make it official. The schedule will be rotating, sometimes on weekends. The salary is standard for cashiers. Is that okay?" Chanel nodded quickly. "Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much." "Then come in tomorrow at 8 in the morning. I'll introduce you to the others and show you how to work the register. You'll get your uniform here. Derek, you can go on your shift. Thanks for bringing your wife." Derek nodded and left the office with Chanel. They stopped in the hallway and Chanel hugged him. "Thank you, sweetheart. Really, you saved me." "You'll be fine." He kissed her on the forehead. "You'll see. Everything will be fine." The next morning, Chanel arrived at the store at 8 o'clock sharp. She wore the new uniform vest that Clarence had given her and tied her hair back in a neat ponytail. Derek could see that she was nervous, but she was trying not to show it. Clarence led her into the sales floor and introduced her to the other employees. Several cashiers greeted her warmly, and one middle-aged woman named Gloria even hugged Chanel and said she was happy to have a new colleague. Derek watched from the warehouse, standing by the door and sipping his coffee. He saw Clarence lead Chanel to one of the cash registers and begin to explain how the equipment worked. Then Tyrone Kincaid approached them. Derek tensed up. Tyrone was one of the employees who helped newcomers learn the ropes. He had access to the system and enough experience to explain all the nuances. But Derek didn't want Tyrone to get close to Chanel. Not after that conflict in the warehouse. Tyrone smiled at Chanel and held out his hand. "Hi, I'm Tyrone Kincaid. I work in the electronics department. Clarence asked me to help you with the cash register. You're Chanel, right?" Chanel shook his hand, smiling in return. "Yes, that's me. Nice to meet you." "Likewise." "Okay, let me show you how it all works. It's really not complicated. The main thing is not to panic if something goes wrong. You can always call someone for help." Tyrone leaned over the cash register, explaining to Chanel how to scan items, enter codes, and process cards and cash. He spoke calmly and patiently, glancing at Chanel from time to time and smiling. Chanel listened attentively, nodded, and asked questions. Derek saw how she looked at Tyrone gratefully, how she relaxed under his guidance. Derek clenched his teeth. He knew there was no reason to be jealous. Tyrone was just doing his job. But something inside him tightened at how politely Tyrone spoke to Chanel, how he smiled at her, how he stood too close to her. This was the same man who had recently insulted him in the warehouse, hinting at something unpleasant. And now, he was getting to know his wife. Derek turned away and went back to the warehouse. He told himself that it was just work, that Tyrone was helping a new employee, nothing more, that he shouldn't read too much into it. But the discomfort remained, lodged somewhere deep inside, like a splinter that couldn't be removed. Chanel settled into her new job faster than Derek had expected. The first few days she came home tired and silent, complaining of sore feet and not being able to keep up with the pace of work. But by the end of the first week, she was already talking about her colleagues, funny incidents with customers, and how much she enjoyed interacting with people. Derek saw his wife blossom before his eyes. She started taking care of herself again, putting on lipstick in the morning and choosing clothes to go with her uniform vest. In the evenings, she was full of energy, cooking dinner, laughing at his jokes, and making plans for the weekend. Derek was happy about her changes, but somewhere deep down he felt a slight uneasiness. Chanel had changed not only outwardly, she had become more open, more confident, and that was good. But sometimes he caught himself thinking that his wife was distancing herself from him, immersing herself in her new life, in which he had no place. They rarely crossed paths at work. Derek spent most of his shift in the warehouse while Chanel worked at the cash register. Sometimes he would walk through the sales floor and see her at work, smiling at customers, quickly ringing up items, chatting with other cashiers during breaks. She looked happy. Derek tried not to think about Tyrone. After that first day, he hardly ever saw them talking. Tyrone worked in the electronics department at the other end of the store, and his paths with Chanel never seemed to cross. Derek convinced himself that his worries were unfounded, that he was just overreacting to the conflict in the warehouse and projecting his fears onto his wife. But then everything changed. It happened in mid-October, on a Wednesday. Derek finished unloading the pallet earlier than usual and decided to go to the break room for a cup of coffee. The lunch break had just begun, and the room was not very crowded. Several employees were sitting at tables buried in their phones, while others were heating up food in the microwave. Derek walked over to the coffee machine by the window and pressed the button. The machine hummed as it poured black coffee into a plastic cup. It was at that moment that he heard a familiar laugh. Derek turned around. In the corner of the room, near the second coffee machine, stood Chanel and Tyrone. They were facing each other, and Chanel was laughing, her head thrown back. Tyrone was saying something to her, leaning in close, too close for a normal conversation between coworkers. His face was only a few inches from hers. Derek froze, clutching his coffee cup. He watched as Chanel touched Tyrone's hand, lightly, almost imperceptibly, as she tossed her hair over her shoulder, a gesture he knew all too well. She did that when she was flirting. When they first started dating, she would constantly toss her hair while talking to him, and he found it incredibly attractive. Tyrone said something else, and Chanel laughed again, this time more quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. She looked up at him, tilting her head slightly to one side. Derek had seen that look before. He knew what it meant. His wife was flirting with Tyrone Kincaid. Derek felt something tighten in his chest. He wanted to go over, interrupt their conversation, say something, but his legs wouldn't obey him. He just stood there watching Tyrone smile at his wife, watching her smile back, watching invisible sparks fly between them. Finally, Tyrone straightened up, patted Chanel on the shoulder, and headed for the exit. Passing Derek, he said briefly, "Coleman." Derek didn't answer. He continued to stare at Chanel, who was now pouring herself a cup of coffee, still smiling. She didn't notice him. Derek turned and left the room, leaving his cup on the windowsill. But a voice inside him insisted otherwise. What he had seen was not normal friendly communication. It was flirting. Obvious, open flirting. In the evening, they returned home together. Chanel talked the whole way about how one customer had made a scene over an expired coupon, how Gloria had stood up for her in front of the manager, how they had then laughed about the situation together. Derek listened half-heartedly, nodding in the right places, but inside he was boiling. At home, Chanel took a shower, and Derek sat on the couch, staring at the turned-off TV. He knew he had to talk to her. But how? How could he ask his wife if she was cheating on him based solely on the fact that he saw her laughing with a colleague? When Chanel came out of the bathroom wrapped in a bathrobe with wet hair, Derek made up his mind. "Chanel, can I ask you something?" She turned around, smiling. "Of course. What's wrong?" "I saw you in the break room today. You were talking to Tyrone Kincaid." The smile on her face didn't fade, but something alert flashed in her eyes. "Yes, I was. So what?" Derek got up from the couch and walked over to her. "It seemed to me that you were, well, too close. I mean, He was leaning toward you. You were laughing, touching his hand. It didn't look like a conversation between colleagues. Chanel frowned. Derek, what are you talking about? We were just chatting. Tyrone told me a funny story about a client. That's all. Are you jealous? I'm not jealous, Derek said, although that was a lie. I just don't like the way you interact. He was standing too close. Chanel rolled her eyes and walked past him into the bedroom. God, Derek, are you serious? He's just a friendly guy. He helped me out when I first started, showed me how to use the cash register, explained a bunch of stuff. We sometimes run into each other during breaks and chat. It's normal. People talk at work. It doesn't mean there's anything between us. Derek followed her into the bedroom. I know people talk, but it wasn't just talking, Chanel. I saw the way you looked at him. She turned sharply, irritation flashing in her eyes. How was I looking at him? Derek, are you even listening to yourself? I wasn't looking at him. We were talking, that's all. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Derek fell silent. Maybe she was right? Maybe he really was overreacting. But the image of Chanel laughing and touching Tyrone's hand wouldn't leave his mind. Okay, he finally said. Maybe I am overreacting, but I don't like it. Just be careful, okay? Chanel sighed and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Derek, sweetie, there's nothing between us. I love you. Tyrone is just a colleague. Don't worry so much, okay? He nodded and hugged her back. But inside, he still felt uneasy. The next day after work, Derek met up with Jamal. They agreed to have a beer at a bar on the outskirts of town, not far from Derek's house. Jamal was already sitting at a table by the window when Derek walked in. He waved at him, and Derek approached, sitting down on a chair opposite him. Hey, bro. Jamal held out his hand, and they shook hands. Long time no see. How are you? Fine. Derek nodded to the waitress who brought him his beer. Mostly work, home, work again. How are you? Same old. Carrying packages from morning till night, my back is killing me. But the pay is good, so I put up with it. They chatted a bit about work, football, and plans for the weekend. But Derek couldn't concentrate on the conversation. His thoughts kept returning to Chanel and Tyrone. Jamal noticed this. Hey, Derek, why are you so pensive? Did something happen? Derek paused, staring into his mug. Then he sighed and decided to tell him. It's about Chanel. She started working for me a month ago and everything seemed fine. She's happy, I'm happy. But yesterday I saw her talking to this guy, Tyrone Kincaid. You probably don't know him, but he works at our store. We had a fight recently and he's a total jerk. So I saw her flirting with him. She was definitely flirting, Jamal. She was laughing, touching his hand, tossing her hair. You know how she does that. Jamal frowned and put down his mug. Are you sure it was flirting? Maybe it was just a friendly conversation? I know what a friendly conversation looks like. Derek shook his head. This wasn't that. I tried to talk to her about it last night, but she said I was overreacting. That he's just a coworker and there's nothing going on between them. Jamal leaned back in his chair, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Listen, bro. I've known you for a long time. You're not the type to panic over nothing. If you say something's wrong, then it is. Women always deny it when they get caught doing things like that. They say you're exaggerating, that everything is fine, that you're paranoid. But if your intuition tells you that something is wrong, then most likely it is. Derek nodded, feeling the tension in his chest ease a little. It was good to hear that he wasn't going crazy. What should I do? He asked. Get straight to the point. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Seriously, Derek, if you suspect she's messing around with this guy, you need to tell her straight up. Either she stops talking to him, or you're going to have problems. Women only understand clear boundaries. If you mumble and hint, she'll think you're weak and continue to do what she wants. Show her that you're the man of the house. Tell her you won't tolerate this. Derek listened, nodding slowly. Jamal was right. He had been too soft yesterday. He should have put an end to it right away, instead of asking questions and trying to understand. He should have told Chanel that it was unacceptable. This Tyrone, Jamal continued. You say he's a jerk? What's your relationship with him like? Bad. Derek clenched his fists. He's always picking on me, saying all kinds of nasty things. We almost got into a fight at the warehouse recently. If the manager hadn't come over, I would have beaten him up. Jamal smirked. See? That guy is deliberately hitting on your wife to piss you off. He knows you're married and he still flirts with her. That's not just friendliness, bro. That's provocation. He wants to show you he can take your wife away from you. Assholes like that need to be put in their place. Go home and tell Chanel that if she wants to save her marriage, she needs to stay away from that guy. And don't ask. Demand. It's your right as her husband. Derek finished his beer and nodded. You're right. I'll do that. Thanks, Jamal. You're welcome, bro. Keep me posted, okay? And if anything happens, I'm always on your side. They hugged goodbye, and Derek left the bar. It was already getting dark outside, and the streetlights were coming on one by one. He got in his car and drove home, rehearsing in his head what he would say to Chanel. When he entered the house, Chanel was sitting on the couch watching TV. She looked up and smiled at him. Hi, honey. How did your meeting with Jamal go? Derek walked into the living room and stood in front of her, crossing his arms over his chest. Fine, we talked. Chanel frowned, noticing the serious look on his face. Is something wrong? We need to talk. Seriously talk. She turned off the TV and turned to face him. About what? Tyrone Kincaid. Chanel rolled her eyes. Again? Derek, we already discussed this yesterday. I told you there's nothing going on. I'm not finished. Derek took a step forward. Listen to me carefully, Chanel. I don't want you to have anything to do with this man. At all. Not at work. Not anywhere else. He's a piece of shit. And we have a long history. He's insulted me, provoked me, and I don't want my wife anywhere near him. Chanel got up from the couch, her face showing her displeasure. You can't forbid me from talking to my coworkers, Derek. It's my job. I can't ignore people just because you have a conflict with them. You can, Derek said firmly. And you must. I'm your husband, and I demand that you stay away from him. He's not just a colleague. He's a man who doesn't respect me and, it seems, doesn't respect our marriage. And if you want things to be good between us, you won't talk to him. This isn't a request, Chanel. It's a demand. Chanel was silent, looking at him. Her eyes showed a mixture of surprise and hurt. Derek had never spoken to her in that tone before. He had always been gentle, understanding, willing to compromise. But now he stood before her with a stony face, and she could see he wasn't joking. Finally, she sighed and lowered her shoulders. Okay, she said quietly. If it's that important to you, I won't talk to him. But I think you're overreacting, Derek. There's really nothing between us. He's just a colleague, and I don't understand why you're reacting this way. But if you want me to stay away from him, I will. I respect your feelings. Derek felt the tension ease a little. He walked over to her and hugged her. Thank you, he said. I just don't want this guy to cause problems between us. He's not worth it. Chanel nodded, pressing herself against his chest. Okay, I understand. They stood there for a few minutes, embracing. Derek could feel his wife's breath, her heart beating beneath his hand. He wanted to believe that everything would be fine, that she would keep her promise, that this conversation would put an end to his suspicions. But deep down, in that part of his soul he didn't want to admit, there was anxiety. Small, but persistent, and it whispered to him that this wasn't the end. Outwardly, everything looked calm. Chanel kept her promise, at least in front of Derek. He didn't see her talking to Tyrone in the break room, didn't notice them together at the coffee machine or near the cash registers. When Tyrone walked past her in the sales area, she pretended not to notice him and continued working. Tyrone, in turn, ignored her as well. But something was wrong. Derek felt it with his whole body, with every cell. Chanel had changed. She had become more withdrawn, avoiding his gaze when he asked her questions about work. In the evenings, she increasingly sat on her phone, smiling at something on the screen, and quickly put it away when Derek entered the room. She began to stay late after her shift more often, 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes. Each time she had a reason. She had to help Gloria close the cash register. The manager asked her to stay and sort out returns. One of her colleagues was sick, and she was filling in. Derek didn't believe a word of it. He noticed other things, too. Chanel started spending more time in front of the mirror in the mornings, carefully choosing clothes to go with her uniform vest. She used to just throw on the first thing she could find, but now she tried on 3 or 4 options before choosing one. She started wearing perfume every day. She used to only do that on weekends or when they went out together. She started wearing lipstick more often, taking care of her hair, and wearing more form-fitting jeans. All of this told Derek one thing. His wife was getting ready for someone, and that someone wasn't him. He tried to talk to her again, but every conversation ended in nothing. Chanel denied everything, saying that he was paranoid, that there was nothing between her and Tyrone, that she just wanted to look good at work. Derek saw how annoyed she got when he asked questions, how she turned away, went into another room, and slammed the door. He didn't know what to do. Jamal advised him to keep pushing, not to let up, to watch her every move. But Derek felt that if he continued in the same vein, their marriage would simply fall apart. Maybe it already had. One evening, when Chanel was late at work again, Derek made a decision. He got in his car and drove to LaToya's place. LaToya lived in a small apartment on the other side of town, in an area closer to the hospital where she worked. Derek rang the doorbell and waited, shifting from foot to foot. The door opened, and LaToya appeared on the threshold in her home clothes, with a surprised expression on her face. "Derek? What are you doing here? Did something happen?" "I need to talk to you," he said. "Can I come in?" LaToya hesitated but nodded and stepped aside. "Of course, come in." They went into the living room. LaToya offered coffee, but Derek declined. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, clasping his hands between his knees. "LaToya, I want to ask you something directly," he began, looking her in the eyes. "Does Chanel have a lover?" LaToya froze. A whole range of emotions flashed across her face. Surprise, confusion, anxiety. She looked away. "Derek, I don't know what you're talking about." "You know," he insisted. "You're her sister. She tells you everything. And I can see from your face that you know something. Please tell me the truth. Is she cheating on me?" LaToya walked over to the window and stood there, hugging her shoulders, looking out at the street. "Derek, this is none of my business. I don't want to interfere in your marriage. If you have questions for Chanel, you should ask her, not me." "I already tried." Derek got up from the couch, feeling anger rising inside him. "She won't say anything. She denies everything. But I can see that something is going on. And I thought that you, as her sister, could help me figure it out. But apparently I was wrong." "I can't help you." LaToya turned around, sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Derek, but this is between the two of you. I don't want to be the middleman. Work it out yourselves." Derek stood there looking at her, feeling everything boiling inside. She knew. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she looked away, in the way she avoided giving him a straight answer. But she didn't want to talk. "I understand," he said finally. "Thank you for your honesty." He turned and left the apartment, slamming the door behind him. As he descended the stairs, he felt his anger turn into cold determination. If no one would tell him the truth, he would find it himself. For the next few days, Derek watched Chanel closely at work. He tried to do it discreetly, watching from a distance, hiding behind shelves, pretending to be busy with work. He saw her standing at the register, ringing up items, chatting with Gloria and the other cashiers during breaks. But he didn't see Tyrone with her. Derek began to think that maybe he really was paranoid. Maybe there really was nothing between them, and he had imagined it all. But then why was LaToya acting so strangely? Why had Chanel changed? The answer came on Wednesday, in the middle of November. Derek finished unloading the pallet and decided to leave the warehouse to stretch his legs. Lunch break had started 10 minutes ago, and the sales floor was relatively quiet. He walked past the frozen food section on his way to the break room when he saw them. Tyrone and Chanel were standing by the far wall, near the door leading to the back rooms. They were talking quietly, leaning toward each other. Derek stopped behind a shelf of canned goods and watched. Tyrone whispered something to Chanel, and she smiled and nodded. Then he nodded toward the door and walked toward it. Chanel glanced back, quickly scanning the sales floor, and followed him. Derek's heart beat faster. He waited a minute, then quietly followed. The door they entered led to the warehouse, the same warehouse where Derek worked. He knew every corner of that room. Derek carefully opened the door and slipped inside. The warehouse was huge, filled with tall shelves stacked with boxes of merchandise. The light was dim, and semi-darkness reigned between the rows. Derek moved slowly, trying not to make a sound. He heard them before he saw them. Laughter. Chanel's quiet, stifled laughter. Then heavy breathing, the rustle of clothing, muffled moans. Derek stopped behind one of the shelves and peered into the aisle between them. What he saw stopped his heart. Chanel and Tyrone were having sex right on top of a stack of boxes of merchandise. Chanel's clothes were half off, her hair tousled. "God, that feels so good," she sighed. "Much better than with that loser." Tyrone smirked. "You mean your husband? He doesn't understand anything. He walks around here like a blind puppy thinking you're a saint. And you come here to me every day." Chanel laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. "He has no idea. Poor Derek, so trusting. He told me to stay away from you, and I meet you every day at his workplace." They both laughed. Derek stood leaning against the rack, unable to move. His hands were shaking, his breath was stuck in his throat. Everything was blurry before his eyes. He could hear their voices, their laughter, but he couldn't bring himself to move. Then something inside him clicked. Derek turned and quietly left the warehouse. He walked down the aisle as if in a dream, not feeling his feet. The sales floor was noisy. Shoppers were walking between the shelves, children were screaming, cash registers were beeping. Derek couldn't hear anything. There was a ringing in his ears. He approached the kitchenware section. His hands moved on their own, as if controlled by someone else. He took a packaged knife from the shelf, a large chef's knife with a wide blade. The packaging was transparent, and he could see the gleam of steel inside. Derek turned and walked back to the warehouse. The door opened silently. He entered and moved between the shelves. Chanel and Tyrone were still there, now tidying themselves up. Tyrone was buttoning his jeans. Chanel was adjusting her blouse, laughing at something. Derek emerged from behind the shelf. Tyrone saw him first. His smile disappeared. "Coleman? What the hell?" Derek didn't let him finish. He tore the packaging off the knife, the cardboard crinkling, and in the next second, he was already next to Tyrone. The knife entered Tyrone's neck with a dull thud, and he sank to his knees, clutching the wound. Blood gushed between his fingers. "Derek!" Chanel screamed. "What are you doing?" Derek didn't hear her. He struck blow after blow, to the chest, to the stomach, to the neck again. Tyrone tried to defend himself with his hands, but it was useless. He fell backward, blood spilling across the floor, onto the boxes, onto the walls. Chanel rushed to the door, screaming. Derek straightened up, looking at her. Their eyes met for a second, and there was pure horror in her eyes. She ran out into the warehouse, throwing the door open. "Help! Help! He's killing him! Someone, help!" Her screams echoed through the sales floor. Shoppers and employees froze, turning around. Derek followed her out, clutching the bloody knife in his hand. Chanel ran between the shelves, stumbling and screaming. Shoppers scattered to the sides, some screaming, some grabbing their phones. Derek followed her, neither speeding up nor slowing down. He just walked. Chanel zigzagged between the rows of products, knocking items off the shelves. She turned around, saw him approaching, and ran faster toward the exit, but her feet got tangled, and she tripped over her own bag, which she dropped as she ran. Derek caught up with her near the third checkout. He grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back. Chanel fell to the floor, hitting her back. She tried to crawl away, raising her hands. "Derek, please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. I love you." Derek knelt down next to her, He raised the knife. No, no! She covered her face with her hands. The first blow landed on her chest. The second was to her stomach. The third was to her chest again. Chanel screamed, but her screams quickly faded into gasps. Blood splattered on the white tile floor, the cash register tape, and the counter. Derek continued to strike, one blow after another, without stopping. He saw his wife's face contorted with horror and pain, saw the light fade from her eyes, but he couldn't stop. When Chanel stopped moving, he finally froze. The knife fell from his hands and clattered to the floor. Derek knelt down next to his wife's body, staring at her. Blood spread around her, a dark red pool on the white floor. Chanel's arms were spread out to the sides, her eyes open but empty. Derek looked around. People were standing around him. Customers, employees, all frozen in shock. Some were crying. Some were filming what was happening on their phones. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, getting closer with every second. Derek slowly sank to the floor, leaning his back against the cash register. He looked at his blood-covered hands and didn't understand how it had happened, how he ended up here, what he had just done. The sirens grew louder. Someone shouted, demanding that he move away. Someone tried to help, but it was too late. Derek sat next to his wife's body and stared into space, unable to comprehend that his life had just ended.